Welcome back, dear listeners. It's time for another ride with Night Drive Paranormal. This is the time of night where I share with you all just some of the terrifying paranormal encounters that listeners of the tape library have sent me over the last few weeks. As I always say, whatever you choose to believe, the people who submitted these stories all claim that they really happened. Tonight I have 6 brand new stories to share, bringing you everything from haunted castles to doppelgangers and even a children's toy that seems to be behaving a little odd. So let's get into our first case of this evening, shall we? Don't touch that dial. This takes place in a small town in Ohio, USA. I was 14 at the time. My twin brother and I, we'll call him S, were staying the night at our best friend's house. We'll call her M, who was also 14. We had spent the day watching YouTube and playing games until we got tired. M's room was very small and only had a twin bed, so the 3 of us slept in the living room. M lived in a trailer at the time of the story. The trailer was rectangular and there were 2 couches in the living room, one on each wall. When you entered into the house, you came into the living room. If you turned left and walked past the couches and bookshelves, about 20 feet, that was the kitchen. The kitchen had an island that had 3 lights hanging above it, that we kept on all night. There was a big blank wall that was opposite the kitchen, and you could see it if you were sitting on one of the couches. M was on one couch, S was on the floor, and I was on the couch that you could see the blank wall from. We had watched a movie and fell asleep around 10. I don't know what time I woke up, but I do know it was early in the morning, probably around 2 or 3 AM. I was laying face out and I could see the other 2 and the wall. I had closed my eyes again to try and go back to sleep, when I heard this faint giggling. I kept my eyes closed, thinking it was M laughing at something on her iPod. I lay there for a little while longer before I hear the giggling turn more into singing. I opened my eyes then and looked over at M to tell her to stop, when I saw that she and S were still asleep. As I'm looking at them confused, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. I look over at the blank wall and see the shadow of what appeared to be a little girl dancing. It was like she was standing in front of the island, and the light was projecting her shadow onto the wall. I stared at the shadow for probably about a minute before it disappeared. I had a lot of trouble sleeping the rest of the night and did not go back to her house for a sleepover after that. Now here's the strange part. Fast forward to the summer of 2023. M, S, S's fiance, my parents and I are all on one big family vacation. We're all 21 at this point. We were staying at an Airbnb and M and I were sharing a room. One of the days we were there, M and I were chilling in our room, talking about experiences we had had with the paranormal. She had just finished a story about seeing a glass fly off her table in her old trailer, when I decided to tell her about the shadow I saw when we were 14. After I finished my story, her jaw was on the floor. M then told me she heard the same thing as I did. Apparently sometimes at night she would feel a presence in her room, and hear a little girl talking or laughing. M also said that she had sleep paralysis occasionally, and would see a dark figure above her, sitting on her chest. M said that the sleep paralysis stopped after she moved out of that trailer. We were both dumbfounded about this confirmation, that what we had seen and heard was actually real. M's older brother and sister-in-law live in the trailer now, and M's brother has claimed to hear the same little girl. Do you have a paranormal experience that you'd like to share? I try to include as many as I can in each new episode of Night Drive Paranormal, so please do get in touch at the tape library at protonmail.com. Please include whatever name you would like to be credited under, and as much detail as you can about your experience. Now on to case 2. Hello. I don't normally like to tell this story as it was really terrifying for me. I also feel like any time I speak about it, I am speaking of something unholy and get super uncomfortable. However, I feel like if anyone would appreciate the experience, it would be you. So this happened in 2013. My family travelled a few hours away to 𝚑𝚑𝚒𝚗𝚒, NC, for a gospel concert. I was not going to the concert, but I was going to stay in the hotel and watch my nephews, who were 3 years old and 4 months old, while the other adults went to the concert. We had an adjoining room shared with my sister, her husband and her 2 children. The room I was in was a typical room with 2 beds. I shared this room with my mum and dad. They were in the bed closest to the doors and the bathroom, and I was in the bed next to the window. The room was very standard, with a desk, dresser, TV, and a small table with 2 chairs. This table was right next to my bed. So the hotel itself was not creepy in any way. I didn't feel uncomfortable there. I watched the kids and they soon went to bed. When the adults came back, they were all tired and we all went to sleep. I have no idea what time it was, but I woke up to the sensation that someone was walking out of the bathroom and into the room. I opened my eyes to see a shadow in the dark room, right at the foot of my mum and dad's bed. It looked like someone was bent over and feeling the bottom of the bed to find their way in the dark. I assumed this was my dad, but it didn't quite make sense that he would have passed where he was sleeping. The shadow stood up and was over 7 feet tall. At that moment I realised that it was not my dad, and at the same time my dad let out the loudest snore I have ever heard. My eyes snapped to their bed in panic. I could only see my mum, but her eyes were wide open and staring where I had just seen the shadow. I looked back and he was moving across the gap between the bed, and then vanished in the blink of an eye. I looked back to my mum, but she had closed her eyes. I assumed that this was a crazy half dream. I closed my eyes and rolled over towards the window. I felt that unnerving feeling of being watched and opened my eyes to see the shadow sitting in the chair next to the table. I got a good hard look at him and realised that he was wearing what seemed to be a cowboy hat. He was just staring at me, but I felt like he was there for me. I don't know in what way he was there for me, but it was not good. I began praying, knowing that my faith would keep me safe and he could not harm me. I fell asleep staring at him and quoting scripture. The next day I woke up later than everyone else, but got up and started getting ready for the trip back home. I felt like I couldn't speak of it because again I felt like it was evil and should not be talked about. I felt crazy and uncomfortable by what happened. I did however mention to my sister that I had slept rough because I had a dream of a shadow in the room. She got a scared look on her face as she asked me, "You saw the man too?" I said, "Wait, you saw him?" She puts her makeup down and drags me by the hand to the other room where Mum was. She said, "You guys need to talk. You have both told me that you saw a shadow. What did you see?" So I start with my side of the story, and as I get to parts like Dad snoring and it crossing the gap between the beds, she completes the sentences. We realise that we both saw it. She never saw him in the chair, but saw him at the end of the bed just like me. We were both pale and all 3 of us agreed we would not talk about it. We packed up and left. After a year I decided to ask my mum more about the event. I wanted to know if she felt the same sense of evil, so after kind of bringing it up and leading with the question, "How did it make you feel?" With no hesitation she said, "Whatever it was evil, and there for you." I don't want to discuss it anymore. And she walked away. We don't talk about it. I feel like it's important to share some personal information about myself to kind of bring it all into perspective. We don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. We don't believe that a loved one can come back and visit you after death. We do, however, believe in angels and demons. Angels to protect you, and demons to harm you. I should also mention, about a month before we went on this trip, I was suffering from the worst depression episode I had experienced up to that point. It was the first time that I had thoughts to harm myself, and in a panic I ran to my mum to tell her I needed help. I do believe that it was a demon, that my spirit was injured, and it came to feed on my brokenness. Thank you to Caitlin for sending in that story. Please, if you enjoy these stories, then consider subscribing. I'll be bringing you more of these every 2 weeks, so I'd hate for you to miss out. For our next encounter, we're off to a haunted castle in Germany. I have a ghost story for you. I have several from my time living on military bases and over in Germany. Women in my family are said to have sight. We can see and know things that others don't see or share with us. My sight has not stayed, but sometimes I know without being told. It creeps people out, but such is life. In the early 1990s, we were stationed in Mannheim, Germany, and our family loved to go castle and cathedral hopping on the weekends. I was only 8 at the time, but I loved seeing the ancient churches and old castles. Dad taught us German and we were able to communicate pretty well with the locals. And my dad was great at convincing locals to show him to the far off corners in the castle. Normally it was fine, we'd get to see some artwork or a statue before going back to Mum. There was one castle. It was somewhere along one of the rivers, I don't recall which one. It was on the same road as the Green Tower Inn, but the castle itself I can't recall the name of. Only that it was higher up on a hill overlooking a river. We only went once to this castle. Dad never took us back. Dad wanted us kids to be independent and encouraged us to explore a little bit ahead of him and Mum, but not too far. This castle had a cellar that was sometimes used as a jail of sorts. I remember that the steps were in the main courtyard, and so Dad let me go down ahead while my parents wrangled the other siblings. The castle had actors the weekend we were there. I had seen several of them dressed in period clothing, and had talked to several of them. So when I went down into the cellar and saw a blonde woman in a white dress in the jail cell, I figured she was an actor. She didn't look out of place. Her outfit was historically appropriate to the ones I had seen others wearing. She seemed solid, but the lighting wasn't great, and she was behind huge thick iron bars. I talked to her. She smiled at me, but she was sad. Her presence felt sad, and I remember wanting to cry. It was very cold in the cellar, and while I wanted to talk to her, she wasn't talking back, and it was getting colder. Not very strange in a cellar of a castle, and I figured maybe she was sad because she was tired of being locked up in the cold. The other actors were allowed to roam, and so being the kind child that I was, I ran up to the main courtyard to ask if she could be let out now. The castle keeper looked at me oddly when I told him about the blonde woman in the cellar. He said they didn't have an actor down there, but I was not having it. I dragged my dad and the castle keeper down to the cellar to show them. But when we got down there, she wasn't in the cell. There was only one way in and out of the cellar. Dad and I had talked about it, because we talked about it was a bad defensive position, because you could be trapped down there. It's why it was better for food storage or locking up a person. The three of us went down and I noticed it was warmer. Not hot, but warmer than before. And the jail cell was empty. The blonde woman wasn't there. I know she didn't come up the stairs behind me, we would have seen her in the courtyard. And this is when I realised something about the iron bars to the cell. You couldn't open them. They were broken and rusted over. You couldn't open the door. The castle keeper asked if I could describe her again. I explained that she was about my dad's height, blonde, wearing a white dress, and that she felt sad. I explained that even though she didn't talk to me, I could tell she was sad, cold and hungry. I don't know why, but those three things really stayed with me, and I repeated them again. She was sad, cold and hungry. I was becoming so upset at this point that I was in tears. I couldn't understand why nobody was helping her. I knew she was cold, and she needed help, but this castle keeper was acting like nothing was wrong. I was so upset that I started yelling, "We need to find her. She needs help." My shouting brought down the castle keeper's wife. She led us out of the cellar and into the little food area, where she got me some tea and food. She explained to my dad and me that the castle had a few ghosts, and one of them was a blonde woman in a white dress, who was only seen in the cellar. Local lore said that she was the younger daughter of a local lord, and that her older sister was jealous of her. The older sister locked up the younger sister in the cell and let her starve during the winter time, claiming that she got the plague so that people would stay away. The older sister married but died in the next year, giving birth to a monster because of her evil deeds, and she haunts the woods around the castle in a red cloak. The blonde woman was seen from time to time in the cellar, and her sister in the red cloak was seen fairly often in the woods. My dad thanked the castle keeper's wife for the story, but said ghosts were not real. He thanked her again and gathered up our family, and we got ready to leave. The castle keeper and his wife walked our family out to the car and wished us well, inviting us back any time. I told my parents several times about the blonde woman. I insisted for weeks afterwards that we should go back, but my dad never took us back to that castle. We moved from Germany several months later, and didn't return until 2002. We visited lots of places in our time there, but we never went back to that castle. I remember seeing the Green Tower Inn and a castle off in the distance, but Dad refused to go to that one castle. To my knowledge, that castle was the only one that we never visited again. I think Dad does believe in ghosts, and he didn't want to chance something coming home with us. A nice little short one next, which I think sometimes can feel like the most genuine to me, but I'm not really sure why. Case number 4. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. I was working at a cleaning company, cleaning houses. Most of the time we worked in pairs. There was one house my co-worker and I cleaned that we never really liked doing, but we couldn't exactly put a finger on why. It was just a strange house. The heart of the house was the living room, with hallways extending down opposite directions. I would start down one hallway, and she would begin with the other, and we would meet in the middle. The house didn't really have anything out of the ordinary about it, except one room that looked as though it had not been touched in a long time, and we were requested not to clean it. The most striking items in this room were a mannequin with a wedding dress on it, and a book titled "Moving On After Loss," sitting on a table beside a sofa chair. We had never met the owner of the house, but we figured they had experienced something sad in their life and felt bad for them, but didn't think too much about it. About the 3rd or 4th time we cleaned the house, I was cleaning my hallway, my co-worker cleaning hers, when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Figuring it was my co-worker coming to speak to me, I turned around to greet her, but there was no one there. Suddenly, a terribly loud sound shook the house, loud enough that I had to cover my ears, like one long, low, thundering rumble. It was so loud that I felt like the ground was vibrating as I walked towards the centre of the house to find out what the hell was going on. I entered the living room as my co-worker did, and we both looked at each other in confusion. After looking around a moment, we realised that the surround sound system had turned on at full blast, set to nothing but static. After turning it off, I told her about the footsteps, and she in turn told me how she heard a door slam before the stereo turned on. Freaked out, we finished the house as fast as we could and left. And no, we never said a word to our supervisor. We never ended up being sent back to that house. I know it's not a crazy, action-filled experience, but it was so frightening at the time. Repeating it now, I still feel my palms getting sweaty. Case 5 next. Before we get into this, I'd like you to just think for a moment. How would you feel if there was something else in your house? Something that could imitate you so clearly that it could fool your own family? When I was 17, I lived in a house that was still a work in progress. Meant to be a ranch house with an upstairs and basement, but neither were finished. It had a lot of other problems, including needing a generator for power, having to gather wood to use in a furnace during the colder months, and honestly just an overall uneasy feeling surrounding it. One of the smaller issues was that the door of the only bathroom in the house didn't shut properly, and you could see into the room the slightest bit through the opening. I lived there with my mum and the family of one of her good friends. We all looked pretty different from each other, but really all you need to know is that I definitely stuck out the most, as at the time my hair had been dyed bright pink, and by bright I mean a neon you couldn't hope to get from mixing paint. We were all sitting in the living room hanging out. I think I went to let the dogs out or something. While I was out, my mum's friend went to go to the bathroom, but quickly returned without using it, and we crossed paths as I came back in. She looked at me then, as if I had grown a second head, like I wasn't real. I asked what was wrong, and she told me she swore she saw me in the bathroom, on my phone, which is why she didn't go in, but I hadn't been in the bathroom that night at all. I'm sure it scared her, but it probably scared me even more knowing there was something in my house that wanted to imitate me, even down to me using my phone on the toilet. Which, yes I do. I know it grosses people out, sue me. I have bowel issues and I need something to keep me company while I suffer. Like I said, I was outside, and we passed each other as she was coming back. No one in the house matched my appearance at all. They were all more heavy-set than me, except my mum's friend's husband, who was gangly but a good bit taller than me. And once again I had bright pink hair, kind of unmistakable. It still creeps me out thinking back on it. Our last case tonight, dear listeners. This one is taking us down to Australia. Don't forget, if you have your own experience you would like me to read, then please do get in touch. It was night, March 2014, in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, and my sister Jade and my brother Alexander were getting ready for bed. During school holidays we would spend the entire weekend sleeping on the pull-out couch in the front lounge room by the front door. Jade and Alex were attempting to pick the third or fourth movie of the night, and it was probably about midnight at this point. I always used to fall asleep by the end of the first or second movie, but I wasn't feeling well that night. They chose Smurfs and were both asleep within seeming seconds of turning it on. I hated being the last one awake. Jade and her friend Tom would always scare me by forcing me to watch YouTube horror shows like Bloody Mary and The Elevator Game. I left the lounge room to get a drink from the kitchen, and I saw my brother Alexander standing there, just staring at me blankly. He was kind of glowing. I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't move. He just stared. I got frustrated and told him to get back into bed, as it was nearing 2:15 AM at this point, and he was always grumpy when he hadn't slept enough. So I got my water and went back to bed, only to find him fast asleep, next to Jade. I didn't think twice about it really, I just went to bed and fell asleep again. The next night I fell asleep quickly like usual, but I woke up at 2:15, thirsty again. I went to get up when I heard a loud noise. It sounded a little like the original Bop It toys, but I knew that ours didn't have any batteries, and we were waiting for Dad to get back from a work trip to get us some. I stayed motionless for a few seconds, thinking that maybe I was dreaming, and then I started hearing the Bop It being played. I looked at my siblings. Jade was snoring, and Alexander was fast asleep. I couldn't imagine Mum playing Bop It, but I was too scared to check. So I laid still in silence for what felt like hours, until I finally gained the courage to go and get a drink. The clock on the microwave read 5:45 AM, and I knew I was going to feel like crap the next day. Walking to the sink with my cup, I kicked my toe on something on the floor. It was our Bop It. I picked it up and pressed the buttons and flipped it over to see that it still had no batteries in it. I was terrified, but I was tired, so I put the Bop It on the bench and went to bed. I woke up around lunchtime that day and started making some food. Bop It is still there and untouched. I pushed it to the side. Alexander was sitting on the bench eating his cereal. "Why were you playing Bop It last night? Did you steal the remote batteries again?" he asked. And I said, "No, I thought it was you considering you were staring at me in the kitchen the other night." He dropped his spoon and said, "No, I saw you staring blankly at me in the kitchen the other night," he said, turning the Bop It over to reveal that there were no batteries. We both just looked at each other, when suddenly the Bop It starts going off. We took it and ran outside to put it in the garbage. We could hear it all that Sunday night before the rubbish truck came Monday morning. I still wonder what my brother and I saw of each other while the other was sleeping. But we all started sleeping in our own rooms instead beyond that point. I think that just about brings our drive together this evening to an end, I'm afraid. But I will be back next week with a brand new episode of the Tape Library, and then we'll be back here in 2 weeks for another lonely dark drive together. If you missed the announcement over on my main YouTube channel, the Tape Library, then I'm thrilled to announce that I finally launched Patreon after it being requested for so long, so you can check out more details about that in the description below. You can get episodes of both Night Drive and the Tape Library early, and even get a special shout out in forthcoming episodes. As of writing this episode, it only launched a couple of hours ago, but a huge thanks to our first few sign-ups: Tape Library archivist Sandy Lusk and Yumiko Grimm, as well as the grand overseers of the Tape Library archives, Agent 355 and Morning Rain 2619, who all jumped at the opportunity to support the shows so quickly. Until next time, I hope you all get home safe, and don't forget to check the back seat.